bir finansal sıkıntı içerisine girip girmeyeceğini tahmin etmeniz mümkün olamaz. Bir kanaatin elde edilmesi gerekir. Kanaatin elde edilmesi için de iç kontrol sistemine kesinlikle ihtiyaç vardır. Bunun da elektronik olarak yapılması gerekir. Zannediyorum açtım. Tabii buralarda anlatılacak çok şey var. Hepinize çok teşekkür ederim gösterdiğiniz sabır için ve güzel bir toplantı ve sempozyum diliyorum. İyi günler diliyorum.
Evet, Türkiye CEO'su Sayın Hüseyin Gürer'e teknolojik gelişmelerin ve ev uygulamaları, muhasebe denetim üzerindeki etkileri konulu sunuşundan dolayı teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi soru-cevap bölümüne geçeceğim. Soru-cevap bölümünde ricam soruyu soran arkadaşlarımızın kendilerini tanıtmaları ve hangi konuşmacımıza sorduklarını da belirtmelerini rica ederek başlıyoruz. Sorularınızı alalım. Peki, soru yok. O zaman oturuma son veriyorum. Zaten sarkmıştı önceki konuşmalardan dolayı. Var mı soru? Evet, buyurun. Adınızı, soyadınızı alalım. Kime soru sormak istiyorsunuz? Buyurun. Yan burada.
Mr. Yağmur'a sorum. İsmim Durmuş Akkuzu.
Duyuluyor.
Nakit esası ve tahakkuk esası muhasebeleştirmesinin uygulandığı ülkelere ilişkin bir harita örneği vermiştiniz. Sanıyorum orada Almanya dikkatimi çekti. Almanya nakit esasına göre mi hala muhasebe sistemini tutuyor? Eğer tutuyorsa niye dünyanın gelişen ülkelerin dışında bir yaklaşım benimsedi? Bir fikriniz var mı? Onu öğrenmek isterim.
First of all, I should congratulate you on your eyesight. Germany is probably the only one of the few major countries that has not adopted accrual accounting. Germany is probably best described as being quite strongly opposed to adopting accrual accounting, but by comparison, other countries like France, Italy, United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Australia, many other countries have. The reasoning for that is not really very clear within Germany. Some of the German Länder, their states, have moved to adopt accrual accounting, but at the federal level they're resisting it quite strongly. For myself, I think the thing that I find really difficult to understand is how you can manage an organisation as complex as the German government now is. I mean, it was complex before. After the financial crisis, it's more complex. It has assets and liabilities and contingent liabilities that it didn't have before. To manage that on a cash basis, to me, is really quite incomprehensible. There are a number of reasons that are commonly put forward as to why you wouldn't want to do it. It might cost too much, for example, to implement accrual accounting. I can just imagine what a regulator would say in the private sector if, say, Microsoft went along to the Securities and Exchange Commission and said, well, we'd like to be able to provide this information, but I'm sorry, the accounting system would be too expensive. I don't think that would be acceptable, and frankly, I don't think it's acceptable for governments either to pretend that they can't put in place a modern accounting system.
Thank you very much. Var mı başka bir soru? Buyurun başkanım. Kendinizi de tanıtarak söylerseniz. Sorunuz kime?
Yan boysa sunumlarının başında kamu gözetim kurumlarının kurulmasıyla birlikte meslekte bir deprem yaşandığını söyledi. Sunumun sonunda da buna tekrar döneceğini söylemişti. Gerçekten bu deprem en şiddetli Türkiye'de yaşandı. Diğer ülkelerde yaşanan sorunlar bizimle aynı oranda mıdır? Türkiye'deki uygulamayı, meslek örgütleriyle olan çelişkisini Kamu Gözetim Kurumu'nu nasıl değerlendiriyor?
I think I said that I would like to come back to it in the discussion session, so thank you for asking the question and providing me with the opportunity to answer. I said it was an earthquake really because it has been a very significant shift, and frankly, I think as a profession we had no choice but to make some adjustments. One of the things that we sought to do within IFAC was to, well, we significantly restructured the standard setting arrangement. So IFAC, and I'll focus on auditing standards, IFAC supports the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board that sets the international standards on auditing. And it really did it in a way that what would reasonably have been described as the profession setting its own standards before the reforms that we put in place. After the PCAOB was established, and with the development of audit oversight around the world, it was very clear that at a national level, the state, the public sector, was taking over the process of setting auditing standards. We regarded it as critically important, still do, that the profession has a significant role in that process. Now, post the crisis, it was clear that the profession couldn't completely control the process in the way it did, so some adjustments were required. And so there's a degree of public oversight of the process, and what we now have could best be described as a public-private sector joint arrangement where the public sector provides oversight and the private sector provides expertise. And I think that's a very sound way to move forward. And luckily, most of the national audit standard setters have adopted international standards on auditing. So that enables the profession still through the international activity to maintain a role in audit standard setting. On the question of how much of a earthquake or disturbance it was in different jurisdictions, it clearly varied, but I really can't think of a country where the change wasn't significant. I mean, it really did significantly change the way audit firms have to conduct their activities. Now, post the crisis, they changed their processes a lot anyway, but with the existence of the PCAOB in America or similar oversight bodies in other countries, audit has become much more of a regulated activity, I would say, rather than a strictly professional activity. And I think we'll see changes in the role of the audit profession over a long period of time. I don't think we've begun to see the long-term consequences of that change. I think it was a change that was necessary to some degree, but it has significantly changed the position of organisations like Toplumunda or my home institute in New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants used to set auditing standards. We no longer do. And so it changes the relationship not just between the government and the auditor, it also changes the relationship between the member of the profession and the professional body and what it is that the profession does for its members. So, and I think some of those consequences are not good in the long term. So I think it creates pressures on professional organisations to do things which are actually not necessarily professional in nature. So, for example, most professional accounting organisations now provide a lot of non-professional services to their members, whether it's insurance services or car hire or whatever. So that relationship also has changed. Of course, the incentives have changed too, in the sense that the audit profession itself in many countries has very little voice in the standards, and therefore they're not its standards. And again, it's well known that people respond better to standards they set themselves than standards that are imposed by others. So I think the answer is it was a significant change in those countries. The one thing that I really regret about that process, I do think it was necessary to make some changes. I do think the public interest needed to be more prominent in the process. What I think is really regrettable is that we seem to respond to crises by looking at what has happened in the cases that could be described as failure and learn from those. And what we do not do is look at the cases that could be described as successes and learn from those. So the failures of financial reporting, particularly in the United States, but in a few other countries as well, led to us putting in place a superstructure around the world that responded to some failures. And in my observation, at no point in that process was there a careful examination of what happened in the jurisdictions which did not have failures. What was it about those countries that worked well as compared with the United States, which in this case was where the failure came from. And we saw the same things post the financial crisis. The set of changes that were put in place were primarily designed to fix problems that had occurred in some jurisdictions, but hadn't occurred in all jurisdictions. And so we didn't learn from those where there hadn't been a failure, we just learned, we didn't learn from those where there hadn't been a failure, we just addressed those where there had been a failure. I think as an issue of public policy, that's a really significant problem. We ought also to learn, say, in relation to the financial crisis. Why didn't we have a crisis in Canada? Why wasn't there a crisis in Australia? What was it about the banking systems or the corporate governance arrangements that meant we didn't have the same kind of meltdown that we had in the financial system in the United States? Thanks for providing me with an answer, a question to give me that answer.
Thank you very much. Herhangi bir başka arkadaşımız var mı? Soru sormak isteyen? Buyurun başkanım. Sorunuz kime efendim?